And look, thanks again for having us again. This is the 11th year of this survey, and look, each year it gives us an insight, I suppose, into the public's attitudes towards sport, exercise and activity, their sporting preferences, and their views on sponsorship and women in sport and technology and so much else. Look, I'm not going to go over old ground. Some of your speakers have already touched on this, but look, the pandemic threw up many challenges for sport, and also challenged how we take part in sport and physical activity. And things changed so quickly last year, and this is reflected in the research. This time last year as well, Rob, if you remember, we looked ahead at the year. It was going to be brimful of action. We thought this was 2020 was going to be an action-packed year of sport. The Euros in Dublin, an Irish team qualifying, hopefully, Olympics, the American Football Classic, and so much more. I suppose what 2020 taught us is that sport has never felt more insignificant in some respects. And we have a public health crisis and people are dying and health systems creaking and an economy in turmoil. But on the other hand, I think it showed us that sport has never been more needed. I think needed to keep us active and physically and mentally fit, but I think needed to keep us distracted and emotionally engaged. I think when we chatted back in April, Rob, we kind of spoke about sport and how sport is everything that COVID isn't. It's a shared experience. It's all about the collective, as Martin was just saying there. And this is true, but I also think that, sport with no crowds is better than no sport. And I think this is also reflected in the stats, and it's reflected in the TV figures that we saw last week as well. I think it's important that we acknowledge the huge work that was done by the sports associations and the teams and the players, particularly amateur players last year, to actually get games played. I think the role of broadcasters as well, and sponsors who also stood by their rights holders. And I think it's important to note the role that government and Sport Ireland played to support sport last year too. I think 2020 proved that sport can adapt, and that the sports industry is resilient. I think it's been really difficult for people. I think particularly people in the events side of the sports industry and the hospitality end of the sports industry. But I think despite the lack of sporting action, there were some moments last year, there were brilliant performances that grabbed the attention of the nation, that gave us an escape from the daily news of the COVID numbers. So some of the major themes you're going to see today, Rob, as you said, and there's a huge amount to get through, so I'm going to pass you on now in a minute, are the monumental changes that happened last year in how we exercise and play sport, brought on by the pandemic. I think the second one is the evolving sports media landscape last year and how we consume sport has changed dramatically, and things like live streaming and podcasting, which Peter will touch on later. The increasing role of technology in virtual fitness and so forth, and how we exercise and engage in sport, I think is really interesting. I think the need and public desire for the continued promotion of women's sport, and now a focus on climate and sustainability too, which I think is going to become a theme over the next number of years. And I think lastly, the optimism that 2021 can actually be a sporting year to remember. I think as we look now, it's obvious that there's going to be disruption in the first 3 to 4 months of 2021. But I think we should look at 2021 as the year that sports bounces back, and that hopefully we have people back in stadia, as Martin was saying. I think it will be fascinating, Rob, to see what happens this time next year. I think some of the trends that we've seen have probably been the biggest jump and changes we've seen in the last 10 years, particularly around physical activity. Will we see this time next year those trends? Are they permanent, or are they just because of what happened in the last 12 months? I'm now going to pass you on to my colleagues. I just want to say thank you to them, Rob, if that's okay, just for all the work that they've done to get this survey done. It takes time and investment and effort to survey 1,000 people nationally and to analyse the information when we're all working from home, like everyone else here on the call. I just want to note as well that it is information that we want to share. And I think, look, it's always been my view that knowledge and information is something that the industry should share with each other, because, the better we all get, the better it is for the industry and the better we do our work. I want, hopefully people to enjoy the presentation today, and I want to wish everyone on the call good luck in 2021. And I do firmly believe we'll emerge stronger for all this. And thanks again, Rob Harton, for the opportunity. And I'll pass to my colleague, Rob Pearson, who's going to drive the bus for the first part of the presentation.
Actually, Mick, it's Peter here.
Sorry, Peter, it's a good start.
That's all right. That's the only little glitch we'll have all day. Hello, everybody. I'm just going to talk to you for a couple of seconds about the methodology behind this research. And as you can see there, it's a 1,000-person nationally representative survey. And if you look there at the breakdown between genders, between regions, between ages, and indeed to socioeconomic class, this is nationally representative. It's a cross-section of Irish society. It's not actually a survey of sports fans, and that's one of the reasons why this is so interesting to us as a community, I suppose. So What stood out to us in 2020, the fact that sport is so central to Irish life is really what stood out to us. Its enduring appeal, our enduring passion for sport. The big three sports continue to dominate our sporting passions: Gaelic games, soccer and rugby. But there's something for everybody in this survey. If you see, just look around this slide here: tennis, cycling, golf, athletics, elsewhere, swimming, walking. So many other sports play a big part in our lives. So what are our favorite sports? Our favorite sports are the big three, as I'm sure everybody would have anticipated: Gaelic games, and for the purpose of this, we grouped the four big Gaelic games sports together: men's and women's football, camogie, and hurling. They're the most popular sports in Ireland, and they have been for the past 3 years. Soccer is still in second place. It's had a little bit of a dip in the last few years, but it would only really take a good run for our men's or women's national team to see that jump up again. And we wish Jonathan Hill all the best in his new role there, because it's one of the most important jobs in Irish sport. Rugby holds firm there in third place on 13%. And if you have a little look around there, you'll see how broad the appeal of rugby is. Jonathan Sexton is our second most popular sports person, our most admired, should I say, and in Team of the Year, Leinster, even though by their own standards they had a kind of fractured and not as successful as they would have liked year, they still came third in Team of the Year, a close third. What else have we noticed? No big news. Katie Taylor, her enduring appeal. Look at this. She is our most admired sports star by a long way, and she won greatest sporting achievement and most memorable sporting achievement as well with Sam Bennett. It's nice to note they're doing well there. As a cycling fan myself, I like to see that. And finally, on this slide here, we'll have a little look at Team of the Year. Last year, Dublin shared this award with Ireland's women's hockey team, but 6 in a row pushed them over the edge, and they win it on their own this year on 24%, just ahead of Limerick hurlers. And then you'll see rounding out the top 5 there, along with Leinster, are Dublin's women's footballers, who won 4 in a row, and Dundalk FC, who made the Europa League group stages. So that's it for me for now. I'm going to turn to my colleague Rob, who's going to talk to you a little bit about our habits and our passions around exercise and sport.
Thanks, Peter. So yeah, I'm going to take you through the exercise and sports habits of the nation. And I think, as Mick alluded to, and what we probably all knew anecdotally, is that our relationship with sport and exercise, what we play, when we play it, why we play it, changed in 2020. And it was down to the reasons that I don't need to kind of go through. So broadly speaking, we've seen a slight increase in activity levels in 2020 over 2019, which is a positive thing. But at 26%, there's still a sizable section of the population who are, stubborn and they're remaining inactive. And sport, by its nature, if you look at the left-hand side of this slide, is all about competition, and it brings people together. And so it's unsurprising to see a drop in the number of people playing competitive and recreational sport. And that drop we've seen there, we've seen a proportionate increase in the number of people engaging in keep fit and general forms of exercise. So what were we doing in 2020? So again, there's been a move to outdoor and individual forms of exercise, and this has been at the expense of indoor opportunities. Now, I'm just going to talk about 3 points here that I think are most interesting. Walking has long been the nation's favorite form of exercise, and for, I suppose, reasons that are obvious: low barriers to entry, everyone can do it, low impact. But there's been a surge in the amount of people walking this year. And we didn't need the research to tell us that, but an 18% increase in the number of people doing any type of exercise is unheard of in the 11 years of this research. And, I myself, and I'd argue that many people here, have found a newfound enjoyment from walking. And whether that's just getting out in the evenings after a long day of working from home, where the community, the sense of community, I think, that we've all felt in terms of just talking to our neighbours when we meet them out and about, and just getting out and about with the family. Those are just some of the reasons why walking has cemented itself as the nation's favourite form of exercise. Running then doubled in popularity this year. 1 in 6 of us is running regularly. And I think when the government put its 2K and then 5K radius restrictions on us, nobody quite realised just quite how much real estate that opened up when you're travelling on foot. It's most popular amongst 25 to 44-year-olds. The knees haven't quite given in at that stage, and the time pressures can be significant for people of that age, whether it's work or family commitments. And the last one I'm going to touch on is swimming. Now, swimming always polls well. It's always in the top 3. But with swimming pools closed for pretty much all of the year, it might seem surprising that 19% of us, which is the same as 2019 levels, were using swimming as a form of exercise last year. But it's down to a boom in wild swimming. We're out in the seas, we're out in the rivers, we're out in the lakes, and we're swimming. And if you've spoken to any sea swimmers lately, then you'll know that the benefits of cold water swimming aren't just physical, but they're also mental. And that segues nicely into the next slide, which is the reasons why we're taking part in exercise. And now the order hasn't changed here hugely in previous years, but the weighting of it has. Health is the number one reason across the board why we're all exercising, unsurprisingly, but at 62%, there's been a big growth in the number of people who are using exercise and sport to manage their mental health. And this is across the board: age, gender, region, class. Mental health is being used, or mental health is being managed by exercise. And I think what's interesting is that, you know, in the past, I think we all knew subconsciously that exercise was good for our mental health, but now there's an acute awareness of that, and we're proactively exercising to maintain and manage our mental health through our physical health, which is interesting. In terms of fitness levels in 2020, as a nation, we got fitter, which is great. 70% of the nation said that their fitness levels either stayed the same or improved last year. The reasons for that: we had more time, we realized the value of exercise during lockdown, and setting a good example to our family were just some of the top reasons that were coming through there. Now, every which way you cut the data, it's clear that those who are classified as ABC1 or middle class are more engaged with physical activity, and they're more invested in their physical well-being. They play more sport, they hold more memberships, and they're less likely to be inactive. Now, it's a big societal issue, and one that the government and Sport Ireland and a host of governing bodies are actively trying to tackle. We've seen big awareness campaigns this year, and we've seen lots of kind of, you know, outreach programs, but the dial is slow to turn in this case. But the investment is you know, needs to continue, and we'll see more of that going forward in 2021. Gym membership, again, gyms suffered badly during 2020. They were shut down. So to see a quarter of us, which is the same as in 2019, holding a gym membership is a really positive thing. I think that this is testament to the innovation and the ability of gyms to pivot their businesses to stay relevant while we were staying at home. And we'll talk more about that later. Club memberships. So this is memberships of a sports club other than a gym. Again, held strong like gym membership. 17% of us are a member of a sports club. But the most interesting stat here is that a third of sports club members joined an additional club in 2020. So we were all looking for something to do last summer, and it appears that those of us who were aware of the benefit and the value of being a member of a sports club were quick to sign up for something new to do. I'm going to hand you over to Peter, who's going to talk through the changing habits of the nation in terms of how we consume sport.
Thanks, Rob. So some really interesting stats about how we consumed sport, should I say, in Ireland in 2020. We consumed less sport, we watched less sport, we listened to less sport, but it shouldn't be a surprise because there was less sport out there to watch, to listen, to engage with, because for 3 months we had absolutely no live sport bar the Belarusian Premier League, as we all know. But there's also an intangible there as well. There was a lot of connection, and people not able to go to matches, people not able to gather together around matches, be that in friends' homes, in the pub, not able to talk about matches on Monday morning in work. Those empty stadiums as well on television, they're less engaging, and that lack of connection, loss of connection has affected how we consume our sport. But it's very, very important to note that sport held up really, really well in 2020, and it has the power to draw us together like nothing else really. Nearly 1 million people watched both All-Ireland finals the week before Christmas, and this, for example, there's going to be huge crowds, audiences watching the Six Nations, which starts next month. So where did we view our sports last year? Unsurprisingly, live on television at home is the main one, 52%. That's down from 65% though last year, because there was less sport on TV. And down at the bottom there, 35% of people last year said they didn't watch sport at all, which is quite a jump from last year, but that can be accounted for from the drop in live TV. Live in venue and live in public, obviously down because we couldn't gather together, people couldn't go to matches bar a very short period last summer. But the interesting one here is live streaming at home. That has gone up quite significantly, and that can be put down to the successes of things like county boards and the League of Ireland streaming their matches live for people who couldn't go to games, and that was something that really, really worked for them. So subscription services we're going to talk about for a second now, and 21% of us, 1 in 5 Irish people, Irish adults, have a paid television sports subscription. That's down from 25% last year, and that's held up really well when you think about it, because there was, as I say, so much of last year where there was no sports. There's still a less sport than there was in the past at the moment, and a lot of people would have suffered a loss of income as well during COVID. And it's interesting to note that its popularity has endured and is robust amongst those younger men between 18 and 24 and 35 and 44. More than 1 in 3 of those men have a sports subscription, and that is unchanged pretty much from last year. So how much do we spend on our subscriptions? It's pretty much the same as last year. 93% spend €100 or less per month on their sports subscription. The males between 45 and 54, they're the biggest spenders. They must have every package going. They've got €100 monthly plus spend. That's probably because they're at the stage of life where they're earning a little bit more. Their kids are probably a little bit older, so they have a little bit more time in their hands where they can sit down and watch the match of the weekend or the golf in the evening or whatever that might be. So I'm going to move on to talk about where we get our sports news. Where do we get it? Again, no big surprise there. Television is the most popular. Beneath that, it's kind of got a pretty digital look about it. Social media websites and apps, also radio in there. And newspapers are at the bottom at 5%, but that's not to say newspapers are down out. That's just saying 5% of us are physically buying a physical paper to get our sports news. An awful lot of people will get their sports news through newspapers via their social media channels, their websites, or indeed their apps. So that's an interesting one to note. And then finally, for me, for now, I'm just going to talk to you a little about podcasts. 14% of Irish adults listen to a sports-themed podcast at least once a month last year in 2020. That's down quite a bit, but it's in line with all the other drops we've seen. That is probably due to the lack of sports that we saw all year, and less topics to discuss as a result, which would be something that podcasts do. But they, like the subscriptions, remain very, very popular with men under the age of 44, 18 to 24 and 25 to 44. 1 in 3 of those listens to a podcast, a sports team podcast, at least once a month, which is really interesting. Now, just to pass you on to my colleague Caroline, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about technology and its impact on sport.
Thanks, Peter. Well, look, as we all know, 2020 was a year like no other, and it was really a year that we leaned into technology. We had to rely on it more than ever for work purposes, for personal connections, but it also played a really important role in how we kept fit and active. So our survey results show that 37% of the public were wearing fitness trackers in 2020. That's up a staggering 40% year on year. And when you think about it, I guess it's understandable where people were maybe missing gym instructors or classes for guidance. They were turning to technology to fill that void. We saw an astounding 58% of 18 to 24-year-olds say they use fitness trackers in 2020, which is obviously a huge proportion of that category. But there's no age limit to technology. We saw a third of over 55s also say that they were wearing fitness trackers of some kind. And in terms of gender splits, it was interesting to note that more women than men were opting for fitness trackers. And clearly, technology works. 76% of our respondents said they felt they were more motivated by technology to be healthier or to exercise more. And again, here we saw this was more skewed to females than males. 82% of females agreeing that it motivated them compared to 64% of males. So really big figures there. One of the big trends we saw take off in 2020 was the emergence of virtual gym classes. And this seemed to be one of those Marmite things. I think people either loved them or hated them, regardless of whether or not we were enjoying them. 29% of us were taking part in virtual classes. And that was either as part of a gym membership or a free online class. And again, it was worth noting the gender splits here. So for those who had gym memberships and took on virtual classes, there wasn't much of a difference between males and female uptake. However, when you looked at the numbers who took on a free virtual class online, only 8% of males did compared to 26% of females. So definitely it looks like females were taking part in virtual gym classes more than ever, more than males. I think it'll be really interesting to see if this is a trend that will remain as part of our lifestyle beyond the pandemic. We saw earlier one of the kind of big reasons people cited for being more active in 2020 was just down to more time, lack of commute, etc. So if working from home continues, and it certainly seems like it's going to some degree, it'll be interesting to see, do gyms need to offer that virtual service to facilitate people working out from home as well as just working from home. I do think on the flip side, we'll see a renewed appreciation for the gym as a place for social interaction as well as exercise, however. Turning then to social media, it seems we're just as addicted now as we were this time last year. 38% of people saying they're checking social while watching sport on TV or online, which is similar to 2019. And while I suppose they're generally not known for their multitasking, it's majority males who are dual screening. So 45% of males and 32% of females checking social while watching sport. Maybe unsurprising, the majority of that fell in the 18 to 24-year-old bracket. But it's not restricted. We saw 43% of 35 to 44-year-olds also checking their social channels while they're watching sports. And when we asked which social channels they were on, interesting to note, the majority are still turning to Facebook, with 67% preferring this channel. That was down, however, significantly year on year by 10%. And we've also seen a huge rise in WhatsApp year on year. So like, we think this is probably down to the fact that, as we said earlier, people aren't gathering for sporting occasions in 2020. So it looks like they're turning to WhatsApp for that group connection over sporting events. Twitter is about the same. It's dropped slightly year on year, but interesting to note, in fourth place, the channels have switched out this year. So last year we saw Instagram. However, YouTube has taken up fourth spot this year with 40% of respondents. That's really been driven by the 18 to 24-year-old category. I think it was a whopping 91% of them saying that this is where they were spending their time while they were watching sport online. This drops kind of down to the 30% mark for the other categories. So the youth audience really driving that trend towards YouTube, and an interesting insight there for brands to consider, you know, is YouTube part of the channel mix when they're considering content, especially if that 18 to 24-year-old cohort is an audience they need to be targeting. So why are they on social? The majority have said that they're keeping an eye on another sporting event, or they're engaging with other sports fans. So whether that's following conversations online or participating in group chat on WhatsApp. We saw 20% were just there to make sure that there was nothing better going on, that they weren't missing out on anything. And finally, 18% wanting additional expert analysis. I think that's quite interesting. We're seeing more and more of this, experts jumping in online and providing their thoughts on matches or performances. And again, an area of interest maybe for brands who are operating in that sponsorship space, and maybe there's a role here to play if appropriate. Moving on then to women's sport in 2020. Rob has already touched on participation, and while we saw female involvement in sport is down, it's great to see more women are exercising overall and looking after themselves in 2020. When it comes to media, look, 2020 should have been a momentous year for women's sport. Unfortunately, as we know, the pandemic hit. It resulted in a lack of elite women's sporting events and a lack of success to savor, I suppose, in a lot of ways. And as a result, half of the population believe women's sport was while given more prominence in the media in 2020 than other years, we still aren't getting enough coverage. That trend was supported by majority females. However, it's interesting to note only 37% of the population watched women's sport on TV or online. And fascinating to see that actually more men than women were watching women's sport. So there is a way to go here. Another really interesting insight that we saw was there was more older people than younger people interacting with women's sport. So again, that might be a time thing, maybe that they just have more time to watch more sport on TV or online. And finally, and I think this is a really interesting stat to leave on, 62% of the population believe that sponsors should invest in both male and female sports. The implication here being really that going forward, brands are going to come under more and more pressure to incorporate female sports into the sponsorship portfolio, which ultimately, hopefully will lead to more money being invested in women's sports, improved facilities, better pay, ultimately higher standards in women's sport. And hopefully that's when we'll start to see trends booking. So we'll see more women participating in sport, an increase in coverage on TV and viewership numbers going up. So an exciting thought, hopefully, for young girls coming up through the sporting ranks, and a huge opportunity, I believe, for brands to really get behind them, support women's sport, and as a result, facilitate this improvement in the industry.
So I'm going to talk now and just build on what Caroline said about some of the public's attitudes towards sponsorship and sports governance. The big picture here is that as a nation, we are aware of sponsors and the role they play in supporting and promoting sport, art, and community events. One stat that's worth pulling out here is that nearly 2/3 of the public believe that big business should be involved in sponsorship in some way, shape, or form. It is absolutely expected that big brands give back to the communities in which they serve. Now, we've seen similar increases in levels of brand affinity, in product differentiation, and in purchase influence for sponsors versus non-sponsors. We've got loads more data sitting on that we're sitting on, and we'd love to bring you through it at another date. Another piece that's worth touching on is, like, the government made a very big bet in 2020 and essentially bailed sport out. And there's been huge public support for this coming through our research, with only a very small percentage of people actually thinking that the government were wrong for doing so. The last piece here, and Mick touched on sustainability, like, the nation is dialed into this now in a big way. From a global perspective and a national perspective, there's huge momentum behind it. And sport has a role to play, and sport is coming under the spotlight for its big stadium, for its international travel, and there's definitely an early mover advantage to be had here. The sports that recognise that there is an issue and that they can help contribute to a greener future and will be seen as progressive and innovative, and sponsors will want to jump onto that story and onto that message. 2021, so for this research, we always ask what events people are looking forward to. And at the time of the research, we were taking a very optimistic view, assuming that everything was going ahead. So assuming everything goes ahead, what the nation is excited about this year is the Olympic Games, first and foremost. Every 4 years, 5 years in this instance, the Six Nations always gets the nation excited. The All-Ireland Championships, again, which we're just finishing up at the time this research was out to field, they're also highly anticipated, and the 5th place there goes to Euro 2020. Now, there is a but, and the but is that just in the first 3 weeks of the year, we've seen a lot of disruption. We've seen postponement and cancellation of some events, the women's and under 26 Nations golf tournaments, and there's a shadow that's been cast over some of the sporting events that have been pushed from last year into this year. And there's huge commercial pressure coming on sporting bodies to play their matches and to deliver their tournaments. But if they can, like, look at the sporting year, what a year it'll be. We've got the Olympics, we've got the Lions, we've got the Euros, the Ryder Cup, and that's all in addition to the regular sporting calendar. But as Mick kind of alluded to at the start there, like, we definitely see it as being a year of two halves. The disruption that we've seen in Q1 will and is likely to continue into Q2, but there's hope that the second half of the year that we'll see sport come back, that we'll see the big tournaments go ahead in some way, shape or form. It's great to hear Martin being so positive and optimistic about getting fans back into stadia. And, you know, when we're standing in front of you, hopefully this time next year, we'll be talking about 2021 as the year that sport came back. And just in closing, I mean, I think that from all of us, this has been one of the most fascinating years of this research. We've seen change like no other. We've seen how we exercise and play sport change and arguably change forever. And just how much of these new habits that we picked up are going to stick and how much will revert back to the old ways of doing things is yet to be seen. The growth of fitness technology and the rate of growth is absolutely staggering, and it's having a profoundly positive impact on the health of the nation. As Peter said, the sports media landscape has moved at lightning pace and everything's on demand, and it's either long form, rich content, or it's in bite-sized snackable form. And as a nation, we're clued in now to the role that sport and sponsorship plays in society and how it can combat these big societal issues that we've touched on. these are just some of the highlights of our research. We really only just got to the tip of the iceberg here. We'd love to talk to you more. Get in touch with anyone from the team, set up a meeting, and we'd be delighted to take a deep dive into the research for you. So thank you.
Really good insight into what we as a public think about sport and what we want to do, where we want to play, what we want to play, and who we want to watch. That point about the socio-economic divide between sport participation is one which I'm conscious has never really been able to get that dial moving, and it's probably a reflection on all of us that we need to do more in order to bring sport to as wide a cross section of the population as we possibly can. There is always a danger of bubbles, and we need to redouble our efforts to make sure that all of those bubbles are being broken down. Thank you very much, Team Teneo. I'm going to let you all back into the room now.